border security, and if we see about like the relationship with Afghanistan, and the scenario of world, like we can see Lebanon, Hamas, we can see Israel and Palestinian issue. So how do you see that this issue will affect Indian and China's relation majorly?
Two, three things here. One is the China has been sensitive about the terror groups in Pakistan, and the Indian side was disappointed with the Chinese response in the 1267 Al-Qaeda Committee of the Security Council. For 8 or 9 years, India has been giving specific intelligence information to the Chinese side on the terror groups based in Pakistan, Zakirul Rahman and other individuals. Yet the Chinese kept on saying there is no enough information on them to proscribe in the 1267 committee. So basically they were shielding Pakistan. Now you mentioned Lebanon and other areas where we saw some incidents recently. China took a position that of a pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah. In fact, many Chinese interlocutors went and met them. China also issued visas to Hamas leaders and criticized the Israeli position. So from that point of view, we may plausibly have also a spillover effect on the bilateral relations. India took a balanced position in this area, while China took a very explicit pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah position.
Yes.
So this will have some spillover effect on the bilateral relations between India and China, on how do they see and how do they respond on counter-terrorism. These issues, I think, will come up in the...
Because their words are something else, their action are something else. It's not matching.
Exactly. So when both leaders say that they condemn all forms of terrorism in their next joint statement, if that comes up, it means that both have their own visions.
So first of all, thank you so much for joining us on this exclusive talk on India and China relations.
Thank you.
So my first question will be the current affairs only. The recent statements of External Affairs Minister Mr. Jaishankar on Indian and China relations, how you see that?
I think he had been saying this, Dr. Jaishankar has been saying this for the past 4 years about about possibly his frustration that things are not moving in a positive direction in India-China relations. Of course, there are some institutional mechanisms like the WMCC and also the Corps Commander level meetings, but somehow the progress is not as expected by him. So I think this is a reflection, because in the last 4 years he must have made at least 22, 23 such statements being critical of China in the national and international fora. And despite so many comments, the Chinese are not responding in any positive manner. I think that is the key feature here. On June 17, 2020, 2 days after the Galwan incident in the eastern Ladakh region, when 20 Indian soldiers are killed and unknown number, although the Chinese said 4 Chinese were killed. 2 days after that incident, Dr. Jaishankar said about the necessity for peace and tranquility on the border. And he said that unless until peace and tranquility prevails on the border, we will not have any bilateral relations. Now, those bilateral relations included a number of dialogues, 30 dialogues, were there before the Galwan incident. These include strategic dialogue between the foreign ministries, defense dialogue between defense ministries, annual defense dialogue. Then there were the joint intelligence level meetings between the Chinese and Indian ministries for the counter-terrorism, as well as for generally looking at the global developments in the in the 1267 Committee of the Security Council resolution. There are also youth exchanges, there are financial dialogue, steel dialogue, there is the Niti Aayog and NDRC macroeconomic dialogue. So about 30 of these dialogues have been shut down after Galwan, and there is no progress in the bilateral relations. Of course, there was trade, which was increasing. Last year it became about $118 billion. In 2005, they have mentioned about a target of $100 billion by 2010, but they could not reach that level. Ironically, it happened when we have the territorial dispute, and the trade shot up to 118, a very long period to achieve that target of more than $100 billion. So we have the exceptions to the shutdown in bilateral relations is trade. Secondly, multilateral, not bilateral, but multilateral. For example, in the SEO, in the BRICS, in the G20, in climate change issues, in WTO issues, in various other areas where multilateralism is connected with. East Asian Summit.
Sorry to cut you out, sir, but he's saying that we need a good relation between India and China to, grow Asia as a power. So do you think that can be possible? Because there are, different interests. China has different interests. India has different interests in the global power.
Yes, well, both of them are kind of developing countries. So obviously their needs are similar. For example, the Western countries have introduced structural reforms and insisted that they shut down the government expenditure on social welfare benefits like health, education, and others. China and India have joined that process of structural reorganization of their economies long ago. China in 1978 when they launched the modernization program. India in 1991 when it launched the liberalization program. So those are indicators. But they also face a lot of problem in terms of unilateralism. They also face issues related to terrorism.
Exactly.
And also specifically in WTO,
exactly.
Where the developing countries and India and China as well, they face issues related to tariffs, increase in tariffs, or tariff wars, as it happened now on the electric vehicles and solar panels, steel exports. In these, there has been some detrimental policy effects on China and India. So there is the larger view that both of them want to have economic development, but there are kind of restrictions and constraints on them, and so they got together in the initial stage. But they were not able to resolve the bilateral issues. One can speak about WTO, one can speak about climate change or on other issues, but once you have not resolved the bilateral and the bilateral becomes more prominent in the relations between China and India, that becomes the stumbling block in the. So either they have to become more mature or somebody have to push them towards a bilateral.
You are talking about economic relationship. So some months back, India put a blanket ban on the China's drones, import of China's drones. But still, some private companies are taking them in India, and in Taiwan also we can see that manufacturing of drones are being done, and that too by Chinese manufacturers. How you see that?
Well, what happens is there is a supply chain integration. A component is made in Taiwan, a component is made in China, another is made in Korea or in Southeast Asia, and these are kind of exported generally to the rest of the world. Take the example of iPhone.
Yes.
Foxconn contracted from Apple, which is a Taiwanese company, and they used to manufacture in Chengzhou in China. Much of their product came from that, and for the past 10-15 years, they've been producing these iPhones in China market.
Yes.
Now, due to COVID supply chain disruptions and also trouble in Chengzhou factories, the Foxconn decided to shift some of its production base to Mangalore and to other places in India. This is driven by their own assessments regarding the US-China conflict that is leading to a decoupling process. This is also related to China's government policies itself in terms of the 2017 National Intelligence Law, which was passed, and some companies like Macron, their employees were arrested in China. So the company now is setting up a shop in Gujarat with $830 million.
Okay.
So generally, with supply chain disruptions, the companies tend to go to a different place. So this is one. Second, with the supply chain working, you have components made in some portions, and then these are assembled and sold in the international market.
But the drones thing were prohibited due to security concerns.
Yes. Under the WTO or under the international trade rules, there is the security provision. No country allows their security to be compromised. Some years ago, 15 years ago, China was bidding for a project in Mumbai, and that is about 1 kilometer from the naval port. So Indian Navy objected to the Chinese dredging projects in Mumbai because it is very close to the naval port and it is highly secretive, highly sensitive area, and so they simply told the government it is not possible. Likewise, there are other sectors like telecom. Many of these are close to the security areas, and so the Indian government had, not just Indian government, even the American government, even they don't even allow their own allies. Dubai was trying to have a maritime project in New York. The American government objected to it, although Dubai was very close politically, militarily to the United States, yet they objected and they could not get this project.
But do you think this ban is like serving the purpose?
Well, it is not clear, but the thing is that a government assesses at that particular point of time whether some things have to be allowed or not allowed. For example, the Chinese government did not allow any Indian software packages in their state-owned enterprises. No Indian software exists now or before in the Chinese state-owned enterprises. As you know that the Chinese government announced recently, a month ago, that they are removing all the Microsoft operating systems as well. So they think that the Chinese government thinks that Microsoft may be putting some bugs in these, and so they are listening to the Chinese traffic, and hence the Chinese government has banned these. So it is quite normal in the international practice to object to any item which is sensitive, which is related to security, because the governments are answerable to the people on the security related matters. Whether that is a viable option or not, we are not clear, because the assessments will be classified. So there is no way one can say that this ban has been a viable one or not viable, or economically whether it was very troublesome to the state concerned.
Or security wise, can we say that it is not like we are directly not importing, but it is being done? behind the
Yes,
blankets.
yes. These drones and other electronic systems, they emit signals to the host country sometimes where this is manufactured. You may have heard about the pager
Yes,
explosions.
yes.
So this is a very simple device. Everybody thought that this is not emitting any signals, but the Israelis found that as a good option to, probably eliminate the Hamas and Hezbollah in the West Asian region. So most of these have dual use and dual use functions, and so nations become very cautious in these. For instance, the BSNL, Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited, uh, they have during heydays they have bought 90% of their routers and other equipment from China.
Oh,
90%, and so the telecom system was under the influence of China. Not just India, but entire South Asia, even sometimes Western countries.
it's still there. It's working.
No, this has been eliminated gradually.
Okay,
Huawei wanted to bid for 5G network in India,
okay.
and they offered trials, and the some in the telecom ministry were conducive for that idea. But finally, the security establishment suggested that this is not going to be implemented in India, and so the trials have been not allowed in the Indian market.
So what do you think? India should put more ban and like strict bans on this drones and other equipment and software from China?
I think the solution is India has to develop these, given the situation that we saw in West Asia and various cases of espionage. Last week, there was a hearing in the U.S. United States Senate hearings. In this, Rush Doshi of the Council for Foreign Relations mentioned that many of the American systems are intruded by the Chinese telecom and other devices. So he argued that United States should put restrictions on the Chinese export of sensitive items to the United States, and soon the U.S. Congress has actually put restrictions on the Chinese.
So basically, India really wants to like need to develop their own system to provide security to the country.
Exactly. I think as part of the Atmanirbharta campaign,
Exactly.
the Indian side has already decided to. But then, of course, India is a member of the Quad, and one of the items in the Quad dialogue process is on critical technologies, including quantum computing and 5G telecom sector. They're also discussing the maritime and the issue of vaccines, but that is secondary in nature. For our discussion, critical technologies are also part of the India, US, Japan, Australia. So I think in addition to producing of the Indian requirements, there is also an effort to integrate with the global systems which are more advanced in nature. So that is the reason when Prime Minister Modi visited US previously, not now, they signed an agreement for the semiconductor industry
Yes,
establishment. And PSMC of Taiwan has also agreed to put up the Assam and Gujarat factories, which should be rolling out chips in 2025 next year. So there is also an effort for international collaboration. But in these international collaborations, we do not see Chinese companies, and that is because of the security concerns.
Security concern. I move to next question, sir. Chinese media and officials have expressed concern about Western influences on Indian foreign policy, urging New Delhi to pursue independent policy that prioritize mutual interest. What's your take on this allegation?
I think the Indian side is following its strategic autonomy and independent foreign policy. But as part of globalization, there is always a give and take in the international system. So on many counts, there is, as I mentioned, India-China cooperated on multilateral issues. Likewise, India and US, Russia are also cooperating on a number of issues. So during globalization, it is quite possible that you have an inter-exchange of views and cooperation. So I think the allegation that India is losing its independent foreign policy is not true. Specifically, if you look at Dr. Jaishankar's comments in relation to US or in relation to China, they were very critical as well. Dr. Jaishankar speaking in Europe, he mentioned about the European obsession for everything that is European, and they were not looking at the concerns of India or other developing countries on climate change, on energy supplies from Russia, on issues of space. So he was retorting that India has its own foreign policy, and India will be primarily guided by its own national interests.
Its own national interests.
When it comes to collaboration on specific issues, case by case, there is collaboration with other countries like US or China, as I just mentioned, or even Russia.
Japan, what do you think about the interest of Japan?
Yes, India and Japan, they have a global strategic partnership in 21st century. What it means is they are cooperating on 4 areas. One is in the maritime domain. Second is in the economic and technological sphere. They have a CEPA agreement, a Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, signed several years ago, and they're trying to further elevate the provisions by including services. India's USP is services and pharmaceuticals. China has not been opening up its market for the Indian software and pharmaceuticals. But CEPA agreement has the labor exchange, services also. So this is a slight upgradation over an FTA, free trade area. So with Japan, we have the economic and technological collaboration and progress and cooperation. The third area is in terms of the space program. Fourth is in the BMD, ballistic missile defense, although not very explicit in this, but there is a progress that they are making, because Japan faces the missile threats from North Korea and China.
Yes.
And India faces missile threats from China and Pakistan. So there is exchange of notes between India and Japan in all these areas of, and they have a 2+2 dialogue between Defense Ministry and Foreign Ministries. And they're planning to have finance ministers also part of the dialogue, which means because everything is related to money, and so the finance ministers.
You mentioned Pakistan. So how do you think that China's relationship with Pakistan and India's relationship with Pakistan can affect China's and India's relation?
As someone mentioned, Pakistan is like Israel for China, as the Americans would treat Israel in terms of the $3 to $4 billion of assistance they provide to Israel. Likewise, it looks like China has also been bailing out Pakistan in many areas, including in the nuclear and ballistic missiles area. Since 1970s, China has been collaborating with Pakistan in the nuclear field.
Exactly.
In the areas of Chashma nuclear power plant and Kahuta, which is meant for the military purposes, nuclear weapon purposes. Coincidentally, the Pakistani fissile material production has actually increased substantially compared with Indian, because India signed a 1-2-3 agreement with the US, capping its fissile material production, and 40-70, 40 for military, 60 for the civilian purposes. No such arrangement between China and Pakistan or in Pakistan. So as a result, Pakistani fissile material is increasing substantially, which is a major concern. Secondly, Pakistani ability to strike major portions in Europe is also increasing. With the Chinese collaboration with Pakistan in the Fatehganj factory close to Rawalpindi. where the enhanced ranges of ballistic missiles are being manufactured. Um, for instance, the MTCR, the Missile Technology Control Regime that bans the ballistic missile technologies, it doesn't include talent or brain exchange. In other words, the Chinese technicians can go to this factory and guide the Pakistani scientists in developing the ballistic missiles of a longer range to hit India. They already achieved that status.
It's a threat to
But
security.
It is of course, and also most important, they also are giving, Chinese are also giving technologies, enhanced range technologies for Pakistan to counter Israel or even Europe. Given the kind of migration patterns that we see in Europe today and the concerns they have, uh, this issue is likely to become an animated one in the future, because Pakistani bomb is considered to be Islamic bomb. And so there is the concern the Europeans or others expressed. So it is not just India's security, but today it is also the security of West Asia, and that of Europe is the major concern for the international community, given the China-Pakistan collaboration in the ballistic missiles and the nuclear program.
So with this all program and relation, do you really think can India and China can grow together?
There is a lot of scope. As I mentioned, they are still cooperating in SEO, in BRICS, in WTO, climate change, and other multilateral institutions. Recently, last year, the Chinese premier came to India to attend the G20 meeting in New Delhi in September. Likewise, Dr. Jaishankar went to the SEO Astana Summit meeting. Although Prime Minister Modi could not go because of his other engagements, and instead he went to Russia. But next month is the Kazan meeting of the BRICS. We are likely to see all these leaders meeting, which does send a positive vibe in terms of the multilateral, kind of interactions. So there is scope of having good relations with China, despite what has happened in Galwan, despite what has happened in terms of South Asia, Chinese role in South Asia. There is still scope for the two countries to cooperate on a number of issues of concern. Climate change, which is a major issue. For instance, the climate change minister from India and from China meet with each other every year in several multilateral fora or bilaterally. They keep meeting. Secondly, in WTO, there is a lot of coordination on the tariff issue, on dispute resolution between the countries involved, and also in other areas. So,
what about the border security? And if we see about like the relationship with Afghanistan, and the scenario of world, like we can see Lebanon, Hamas, we can see Israel and Pakistan, Palestinian issue. So how do you see that this issue will affect Indian and China's relation majorly?
two, three things here. One is the China has been sensitive about the terror groups in Pakistan, and the Indian side was disappointed with the Chinese response in the 1267 Al Qaeda Committee of the Security Council. For 8 or 9 years, India has been giving specific intelligence information to the Chinese side on the terror groups based in Pakistan, Zakirul Rahman and other individuals. Yet the Chinese kept on saying there is no enough information on them to proscribe in the 1267 committee. So basically they were shielding Pakistan. Now you mentioned Lebanon and other areas where we saw some incidents recently. China took a position that of a pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah. In fact, many Chinese interlocutors went and met them. China also issued visas to Hamas leaders and criticized the Israeli position. So from that point of view, we may possibly have also a spillover effect on the bilateral relations. The reason being that after October 7 incident in Gaza, the Indian government cooperated with Israel because the BJP manifesto prior to the elections, issued during elections, mentioned about zero tolerance to terrorism. So on that basis, they cooperated with Israel. However, India also sent relief materials for people affected in Gaza in the airstrikes. So India took a balanced position in this area, while China took a very explicit pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah position.
Yes.
So this will have some spillover effect on the bilateral relations between India and China on how do they see and how do they respond on counter-terrorism. These issues, I think, will come up in the...
Because their words are something else, their action are something else. It's not matching.
Exactly. So when both leaders say that they condemn all forms of terrorism in their next joint statement, if that comes up, it means that both have their own visions of India emphasizing on cross-border terrorism and China emphasizing on its own Xinjiang, Tibet, Inner Mongolia related matters. So there is some difference of opinion and approach between China and India on terrorism aspects.
So, next question. What role does public perception and media play in shaping the narratives around India and China's relation?
Indian public opinion and perceptions after Galwan has become highly negative towards China because previously the Chinese were saying that they will have CBMs, confidence building measures. They will use these measures for stability in bilateral relations and on the border. However, Galwan became a surprise, and the fact that 20 Indian soldiers were killed, that became a shocking incident for the Indians. And the visuals that came up in Galwan, that the Indian soldiers were killed, that changed the perceptions. So if you look at the Pew public opinion polls, if you look at the Times of India Mass Communications Institute polls, they generally tend to be highly negative of the Chinese. Previously, before Galwan, there is a very positive image of China, that they are hardworking, they are focusing on economic reforms, they are focusing on industrialization. They are doing good in very many technological frontiers. But Galwan changed that opinion, and the latest is that nearly 43% people in India oppose the Chinese in terms of their policies. So that is quite a huge number of negative perceptions of China. And I think the Chinese government should do more in correcting that behavior, that perception, and accommodate the Indian youth and the Indian policies in the long term. As such, we don't see any solution for the territorial dispute in the immediate future.
Exactly. So there are so many border issues with China we have right now.
Yes, and we are adding up so many other issues as well. For instance, in 2019 and 2020, China raised the Kashmir issue in the Security Council.
Exactly.
And they wanted to have some kind of a resolution. But the other P4 members were not conducive to this. So they rejected the Chinese argument, and it looked like for them that P4 will vote against China in terms of the Kashmir related matters. So China backtracked. China did not raise this. It doesn't mean they will not raise this again in future on Kashmir. So China has been adding up troubles over and over again.
So can India trust China?
Dr. Manmohan Singh addressed this in the Lok Sabha once when he mentioned that we trust China but we verify. Ronald Reagan was the first one to say this for the Soviet Union in the 1970s, 72 or 73. And he said that we trust the Soviet Union, but we verify. Verify means not just the speeches, but actions.
Actions.
And if you still have 70,000 troops on the border by the Chinese, and if they are not resolving what they have promised, for instance, in February 2021, the defense ministries of the two countries said we will have disengagement, de-escalation in all friction points.
Yes.
But we still have 3 friction points. Dr. Jaishankar mentioned 75% issues covered, but 25 still remaining.
Yes.
So those 25 include those 3 areas where China has not removed its troops, where we were patrolling historically, but that is now problematic. So I think when you see all these statements and actions, it becomes clear that the public perceptions will become negative. It is the base exists here in the border areas, so that perception still is retained with the youth.
So can India face China?
In terms of military,
in terms of military and of course diplomatically also.
What has happened after Galwan is India started standing up to China. If China mobilized 70,000, today India mobilized 120,000 troops in eastern Ladakh, and also across the line of actual control, the entire line of actual control, 3,488 kilometer long border. So India stood up there, and today has 44 strategic roads constructed. And as one general told me, we are feeding over 1 lakh people on the border, meaning the troops, giving breakfast, lunch and dinner. That in itself is a huge task. In areas which are 3,000 meters above sea level, in areas where it is minus 30 degrees centigrade, feeding them, clothing them, giving ammunition, equipment, the new equipment. For instance, we have this new AK 104 rifle or 204 rifle, which is said to be one of the major inventions by Russia. Today we have those being handed over to the Indian armed forces, Indian military. So most modern equipment is going to the border areas, Rafales, the C-130J aircraft, the light artillery we purchased from the US, the Predator drones, and Su-30s, and all sorts of new equipment is going to the border. And so in the military field, we stood up to the Chinese, number one. In the economic field, India today is the 5th largest economy.
Yes.
And China is the 2nd largest. And these two things are happening without the cooperation of two sides. $118 billion of trade is between a seller and a buyer, rather than between two friends or two close companions. So once this veneer is gone, probably the trade will also decrease between the two countries. So in other words, in economic field, India is making its own efforts. China has its own efforts since 1978. So these two are going on two parallel tracks altogether, not meeting at any given point of time. In diplomacy, India is cobbling up its minilaterals, multilaterals, quadrilaterals, and many arrangements with the global community. The Quad is one example where India's capacities will rise in future, in technology, in military, in maritime areas. So it is seen as conducive for India. And China actually thinks that Quad is going to be detrimental to China's security. So from that point of view, I think it was a brilliant move by India to have relations with the Quad countries because its capacity would increase in various dimensions, economy, technology, and others. India is also signing a number of free trade agreements. India did not join the Chinese-led RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, but it has now I2U2 FTA talks with Scandinavian countries, some already concluded. Then FTA with Europe, FTA with UK, FTA with Israel, and then there is also the IMEC project that was signed last September, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. So India is making its own choices, not joining the Chinese-led institutions or initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, like the RCEP, like China has this Global Security Initiative. India did not accept that principle, and India is suggesting to an inclusive architecture rather than a Chinese-led security architecture. So India is also putting up its own flags all over, and I think there is a concerted effort here by India not to be influenced mainly by China.
So what advice you want to give to Indian policymakers?
Well, I think we are on the right track, but we need to resolve the territorial dispute with China. That is, of course, it cannot be resolved. It's complex, and for example, the Chinese insist that Taiwan should be given to China. Just because the 6th Dalai Lama of 15th century hailed from the Tawang monastery, and so their argument is that it should be given to China. But they are not giving Mount Kailash, where Shiva is known to have resided over. So it is a unilateral kind of demand that the Chinese are making. It means that this is not going to be resolved anytime soon. Nevertheless, I think we need to have, previously we used to manage the borders. That has gone now with the Galwan incident. So we need to think out of the box, and foremost is to see no incident happens on the border. Because these are huge countries, 1.4 billion each. Secondly, both have strategic depth, both are nuclear, both have huge conventional military strength, both have a lot of scientific and technological depth. India had sent the mission to Mars, indicating how sophisticated its technology is. Today, the Chinese also have similar, they are leaders in 5G technology, and also the 56% of the electric vehicles are produced in China. So they have their niche areas, India has its own niche areas. So in other words, the strategic leaderships should consider to reduce the tensions and resolve many bilateral problems between the two.
Basically. Thank you so much, Mr. Srikanth, for giving us such a deep insight on the future of India's and China's relation. Hopefully, we will be able to maintain it, and let's see how China will see India in future. Thank you so much for talking to LawStreet Journal.
Thank you.
लॉ स्ट्रीट भारत, राष्ट्र के हित में।